Hey, welcome everybody. This is John Paul Mendoza with It's a Paul World, and we have a very special guest for all of you today. And I'm really excited that she was able to take some time out of her busy schedule. And we have the one, the only Gloria Greenfield. And Gloria, welcome. Glad that you're with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
So tell everybody a little bit about who you are, because I mean, you know, I did some research on you, but it's always good to get a sense of who you are, and then let's get into some good serious discussion.
Okay. Well, I am a documentary filmmaker, and I produce and direct and write films that support the values of freedom and democracy, freedom and liberty, and also expose the threats and the sources of the threats that are a danger to the sustainability of our freedoms and liberties. I've been doing this since 2006. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. Well, and that's a big task, and obviously you're trying to take on some pretty tough subjects. So talk about. So what are some of the threats that you see that are out there right now?
Okay, if I could just go back a couple of years, I'd like
Sure.
to
yeah.
talk about my last feature documentary film, which really is going to set us up for the next one.
Okay.
My fourth feature documentary film, called The Fight of Our Lives, Defeating the Ideological War Against the West, examined the anti-Western ideas and movements that were penetrating the West, and including our universities, our governing bodies, and the public square. And it's interesting to see the difference between where we were at in 2018, which wasn't a pretty sight, and where we are now. Things are escalating very, very much. I believe very strongly that the biggest threat that's facing the West right now is a communist threat, as well as Iran and North Korea and China, but China's encompassed in that communist threat. I believe that the Chinese Communist Party is actually the biggest threat. That is the source, and they are working to fund some of the anarchist and Marxist-Leninist organizations and movements that have been rioting and looting and trying to take down what I consider to be pillars of Western values. You know, if we go back and look at the origins, in particular of, say, the United States, the Pilgrims came to this land to establish religious freedom. They weren't running from religious freedom. They wanted religious freedom. It wasn't freedom from religion. It was religious freedom. And that's why we can see the incorporation of biblical values, Judeo-Christian values, in our Constitution,
right,
in our the early establishment of our universities, in the culture of the United States. And where we are today is at a stage where religion is being demonized. Now, obviously not all religion. Some religions are considered to be politically correct, such as Islam, but Judaism and Christianity are being demonized. And we see that demonization happening on university campuses, where Christian students and Jewish students are being persecuted, discriminated against, and actually beaten up, as well as what's going on in the current administration of allowing some of the legislators who express hate on a daily level to go unscathed. So I think we have a problem. I think that the hatred being expressed towards people of faith is part of the seeds that were planted by the KGB back in the 50s. So
Interesting.
yeah. So give me some of your thoughts on this so far.
Well, I do agree with you that right now we have those who say that they're not very religious have adopted their own religion. I mean, communism becomes its own kind of religion and has its own tenets and has its own perfectionism and has all of those things that they want it to have. And of course, it is very much driven by this intellectual belief that we are so superior that we know what to tell everybody what to do, even though they themselves can't, run their own lives, but we can tell everybody else what to do. And I've always I started on the left. I mean, I'll just be blunt, Gloria. I started way on the left, and the things that pushed me to the right and actually pushed me to liberty and being a libertarian is just I looked at these people and I said, you people are just not, you're just not stable, for one thing. And the other thing is that they lived by the rule, and we saw this a lot with Barack Obama, which is the ends justify the means. And if the ends justify the means, if that really truly becomes the guiding principle, and I'm not saying that they're, and everybody's like, well, then you got to pull back and say, well, there's bad on all. No, the ends justify the means, and this is just one of the most dangerous things. Because if you actually get to that moral place, the ends justify the means, then frankly, whatever you deem is appropriate for you, it doesn't matter what other people happen to think. So I think that I agree with you that we see a lot of that, and we see a lot of this ends justify the means, and to me it's just ludicrous, and the drive to me to definitely want to be on the other side of that is the fact that if somebody, and this is, and maybe you could also, I mean we may touch on topics
I'm looking forward to responding to some of what you're saying. I agree with you, but I when you talk about the ends justifying the means, it points to the work of Herbert Marcuse, who was a German philosopher, who was part of the Frankfurt School, who came over to this country to escape from the Nazis. And he was the mentor for Angela Davis and the Black Panthers and the Weather Underground, all of the radicals in the generation. I don't know how old you are, but I was born in 1950. And so I'm part of that generation that's responsible for a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with today. But Herbert Marcuse, laid down some significant principles for those radicals, which was, this country will never be able to be taken over by using an economic analysis or a class analysis, that the analysis that would work in this country is race.
Oh, I believe that. Yes.
Yeah. And he also, going to the ends justifying the means, he taught them that, intolerance on the part of the radicals is important, that radicals should never tolerate the established government and society. And also violence is really important, that the Marxist Leninists are so right that it justifies their use of violence, all the things that we're seeing today.
Right.
So I do think that the ends justifying the means is an indication of a lack of morality.
And I think also a total lack of historical perspective that exists today, in which we have people who are trying to rewrite history, and rewrite history and rewrite history. Very common problem that we saw with, and I'll take a quick diversion, which is since in my regular life, not my, trying to advocate to get Rand Paul elected president. My regular life is I'm a business consultant. And I have a lot of clients all over the place. And what I tell them is people will find a biography. They want to read a biography about somebody. And I said, well, the thing you have to be careful with biographies and this is especially true of business leaders, people who are, thought leaders, is that you want to find a biography that's not a Stalinist biography. And people say, what do you mean by a Stalinist biography? I said, well, listen, Stalin had not one, not two, but three official biographers. And the first two didn't make it. I mean, and it's a true story. They did not make it. And what happened is that they would write Stalin's story and they'd say, protecting of the homeland, cared for children, killed 5 million Ukrainians. And Stalin would go, I don't really like how that's not going the right way. Next guy. Right. And literally he had biographers and went through three of them. So I say to people all the time, be careful about Stalinist biographers. So this gets back to what we're talking about today, which is be careful about people who want to rewrite history based upon well, first off, to project values backwards is insanity, because if that's the case, then we all are guilty. We are all guilty of killing the Neanderthals because we killed the Neanderthals. I mean, right. The Neanderthals need reparations, Gloria, don't they? I mean, we got to find out where they went. Well, yeah, I mean, stuff happens. So whenever I meet people who ask and get that way, and they want to go back and rewrite history, those people I think are extremely dangerous because they can play fast and loose. And there is no answer because we cannot go back in time. We cannot solve these things. Now, what we can do is learn from history and attempt not to repeat it. But unfortunately, humans are flawed enough that we end up usually repeating the worst mistakes over and over and over again. I mean, how do we let someone like Pol Pot get away with doing what he was so bad that the Vietnamese went in and stopped him. I mean, how bad is he?
You're
right. The communists.
So, you're bringing up the rewriting of history is very significant. It's very important to really understand what's happening. And we know Stalin, Trotsky, all of them, it was very important for them to rewrite history.
Right.
And even during the Second World War and the Holocaust, Goebbels said, he called it the big lie, that when you're rewriting history, you say something so many times that people absorb it and accept it as being truth. And so we experienced that, and unfortunately, too many of the nations were appeasing it when, Arafat decided that it was very important for them, the Palestinians, to rewrite the history.
Right.
And when you allow a significant movement like that get away with rewriting history, it's going to come back and bite you. And that's what we're experiencing now. We're experiencing that history is being rewritten, and that rewriting of it is being supported in the universities. And the problem with that is that those college students, the students who are attending those universities, are the future leaders. And they take that falsified history with them. You have to falsify history so that you can convince people that they should accept things that are insane.
Oh, very much so. And to that point is that if you look at where we are today and you look at some of the work that you're trying to do, is that I am, and again, I'll probably be walking a little bit on eggshells here, but I am surprised at when I look at the demographic breakdown of voting blocks of how many people who are, and I understand they are liberal socially, but I am surprised at how many people do not understand the anti-Semitic threat that exists out there, and that is a real thing, and that in some ways that is a canary in the coal mine as to what's going to happen. It's an easy target. And what it does is that it foments this. And when you see these people who are saying, oh, no, we're not being anti-Semitic. Well, yeah, I mean, when people start flying rockets over, yeah, okay, that's just it's not a good thing. Do not try to conflate that these two sides are the same. And again, I just find it astonishing that people cannot understand or grasp that and say that that's acceptable because of whatever reason they want to think it is.
Well, that gives us it gives us a much better understanding of what was going on in the 30s, in the 1930s in Germany. And you're right, people are not accepting it. And there's a lot of different things going on here. When the Los Angeles chapter of Black Lives Matter marched through the Jewish neighborhood in Los Angeles and vandalized the synagogues and the Jewish stores and graffiti, they caused a lot of destruction. And where was the outcry to that? And when the Palestinians in this country and pro-Palestinian supporters were riding on trucks not very long ago, and in both Los Angeles and New York, throwing firecrackers at Jews, in Los Angeles, pulling up to restaurants asking who was Jews, and those Jews who said, well, I'm a Jew, they would get beaten up. I mean, where is the outrage? If that happened to people of color, it would be front page on every newspaper, every media in the country. But you know what? People think that, it's Jews, they have it coming to them. In the same way that this month in Canada, over 2,000 churches, both mostly Catholic but also Anglican, were bombed, were burned, were vandalized because there was an incorrect mention of mass graves that were found of Indigenous people. And it wasn't until later that there was a correction made that they weren't mass graves. It was a cemetery. And the crosses on the cemetery, it's such a long time ago that they disintegrated. And even Trudeau would not come out and say anything strong about how this was a terrible thing. And one of his right-hand people actually came out and said, well, the Christians had it coming to them. I mean, we are at a very dangerous point in history right now. And if we don't stand up and do something about this, we are going to find ourselves living in a totalitarian communist environment.
Well, and I hope to be a little bit more optimistic than you, but we will see this unfold. One of the things I think that would help a great deal, and that is that those who are in in the liberty space and who are on the right are Christians. I cannot speak for the Jewish community, but what I can tell you is that messaging is very poor, media is very poor. The fact that they're not very good technologically, and they're not, and as a group, we're not getting our message out, and we need to get our message out. And of course, the amazing part about it is that the left works very hard at getting their message out, and has worked tirelessly at getting their message out, and in fact has gotten their message out, and is pulling people in that direction. I think that they lose that firepower though, because there's one big challenge that communists run into. Again, I had relatives that were in East Germany and Poland and what then became part of Ukraine, and I can tell you what they start losing is that the communists have a really good sizzle to sell up front, but there's no stake, and there is no stake, and the way to attack the U.S., I believe, I'm talking about attack from a metaphorical attack, is that you have to explain to people how much they're giving up universal basic income is a ridiculous thing. Saying, I'm here in California, going on the COVID site, and in the first two paragraphs, the word equity kept coming up over and over again. And this is about a pandemic and how to get people vaccinated. So when people say to me, what's the difficulty? I said, first off, you don't want equity. You want arms with shots in them. Equity, this isn't all about measuring this thing out. Because by the way, if you finally get to this perfection of metering it out and finding out what everybody is, I'll tell you, I'll just say a little funny aside. My wife and I, when we travel, we always try to go a little bit offbeat. So we were on the main island of Hawaii, and we decided that we were going to, and we were on the west side, which is the dry side. We were going to go drive all the way around the big island of Hawaii, which is pretty big.
Yeah.
And what we did is we went to Hilo, and Hilo it's an industrial town. It's where the shipping for macadamia nuts and coffee and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we go there, and there's a museum. So my wife says, former educator, let's go to the museum, because we always do that. So we go to the museum, and it's really filled with locals, right? They're looking at us like, who are these people wandering in?
Mm-hmm.
And they had a very large open display and an installation, if you will, showing the petition that were sent by Hawaiians or from Hawaiians to President McKinley saying, do not annex us. Please do not annex us. We do not want to be annexed as a U.S. territory. We don't want to do that. And there were three gentlemen. They were all, in their 70s, probably late 60s, early 70s. And they're basically reading all of this. They're studying this. So I walk up and say, hey, what's the story? What's this about? And they said, well, this is all about how we wanted to not be annexed by the United States. We wanted to be an independent Hawaiian state. I said, okay. And he said, and by the way, we believe that we're due reparations. I said, now, by the way, this is years ago, probably 20 years ago. I said, okay, well, I got to see the names. I want to see the names. So they walk over, and this guy shows me his grandparents' name, and it's all Hawaiian. Next guy shows it to me, and yeah, that's all Hawaiian. The next guy shows it to me. I said, wait a second, what's that? And he goes, well, I'm 25% Portuguese. I said, well, listen, pal, you're not getting more than 75 cents on the dollar. I'll tell you that, if we ever do it. And these guys looked at me, and they were a little flummoxed, if that's the right word. And I said, you got to understand, the problem with reparations is that we all have a bitch. We all have a complaint. And here's the thing, is that you guys didn't want to be annexed. I got it. Time has passed. But I'll tell you the other thing is, let's say you weren't annexed. I said, let's play that game.
Yeah.
And I said, so how well do you think, because there was a large Japanese population, if the Japanese rolled in, and there were not all those ships in Pearl Harbor, and the Japanese took over, what do you think the Japanese would have done to you? Have you seen what they did in, let's pick a place, the Philippines? Let's pick a place, Burma. Let's pick a place. No.
You could even go, you could even point to Nanking, the rape of Nanking.
Well, and I said, what do you think would have happened? I said, so you can complain about that, but the other side of it is, or you can say, that's how the cards fell. This is what we have. And how do we make this work? Because you are trapped in an unsolvable situation.
Mm-hmm.
Back to your documentary. So hopefully what you're doing is getting this message out to people and explaining to them this, and hopefully getting people to wake up, because I think that is where the left has a very high superior advantage, which is in their megaphone and their ability to proselytize and promulgate this, and they get it out there, and we do not. So I was really pleased that you were going to talk, because I haven't seen her films, but just the concept that, because more information is better than less. And that's I think the real danger right now is there's a real squelching of information, really trying to tamp it down.
And I agree with you. The message is really important. The communication is really important, but we can't overlook the fact that the situation where we are right now is 70% of millennials are supportive of Marxist-Leninism and of Generation Z, the next generation. 1 in 3 are. They support communism. They think communism is better than capitalism. So we see that the education, which today it's starting in elementary school, it's starting in kindergarten. We can see the kind of propaganda and indoctrination that's happening from kindergarten through graduate school. And we have to deal with that. We need good patriots, good and decent people to get on school committees to make sure that that the curricula is not taken over by these radicals. We're going to have a problem with this next generation, and you know, it's not always, you know, for Zionists who are very concerned about, you know, how strong the rewriting of history became. There was a lot of, oh, if we only have better communication, if we only have better communication, well, you know what? You could have as much communication as you want, but if the broader society has been indoctrinated with hate and with lies about what the good and decent people want to do, is going to be very difficult, regardless of how slick or how effective that propaganda, the communication, the messages are that you get out there, because we have to deal with de-indoctrinating our youth.
Well, and I take that to be correct. I think you are right. I think that both of us would be in agreement, and I agree with you that we have to kind of unroll this. On the other side, if we don't start by getting better at these things. I mean, when I found out that, you know, and I talk to a lot of people. I mean, I saw Donald Trump speak at FreedomFest as he was starting to go for his run for the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I already had a guy, Rand Paul. But again, and you know, we've never met before, but I was a professional gambler for 4 years, and I bet on the winner. Damon Runyon said, bet on the winner. Mm-hmm. So after I saw Donald Trump at Freedom Fest, I started offering $100 that Donald Trump would win the primaries and he would win the White House. And I ended up having 5 people take me up on that. And again, it was $100 minimum because I don't want to hassle with anything lower than that. I couldn't find anybody who was brave enough to go beyond that. Mm-hmm. But what I can tell you is that he shook up a lot of people and scared a lot of people. Now, you know, bombastic, all these other things, got it. But if you look at what he was attempting to do, I think that was all fine and good. Again, he is a very interesting communicator, but he is not an inclusive communicator, meaning that if you wanted to help his cause and his people, if you send money, he's happy. But he doesn't necessarily want the foot soldiers, and that's what I think you're talking about. We need foot soldiers who are taking this message and taking this fight, because that's what it takes. You cannot just use Twitter. You cannot just take Facebook, because that's not where he lost. Donald Trump lost because he lost the ground game. He did not have a ground game. And he did not have a ground game in this sense. Again, I know that's a little bit off topic, but he didn't have that. But he exemplifies one of the best communicators who missed out on all this technology. And the technology is how do you get 1 million people to carry the story? Or in your case, how do you get 500 people to then take your documentary film and introduce it to an audience that doesn't necessarily know about it? How do we get that available to people, okay, and show that to people, and then make that step? Because really that's really where it starts, because that's the biggest fear that the communists have. The biggest fear they have is that the cracks in the wall will open up. And we know this from history. We know that Stalin killed everybody who opposed him, not because they weren't good communists, but because he knew any crack in the wall and it could fall apart.
Right. So you're looking at it without acknowledging the censorship that's going on now. The way that independent documentarians get their films out there is today through digital platforms like Prime Video, like Apple TV, like YouTube Movies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we're starting to see the encroachment of censorship from those platforms. So
Sure.
hundreds of thousands of people have seen my films. I mean, I know how to get it out there, but there is a challenge of how we come up with, what are the new strategies that we need to come up with to compensate for the censorship of conservative and libertarian films. Look, I don't want to get into a whole thing about President Trump, but I think that the fact that he was censored and the fact that he was sabotaged also go along with some of the other factors that you mentioned. I think he was very strong in talking to the people. You know, he wasn't. Yeah. All right. So
Yeah, you and I would agree. I mean, you know, censorship is a really tough thing. Here's the challenge, and I said this to Republicans decades ago. You need to build your own resources.
That's right.
Need to build your own resources. You need to go and get people, and you need to vote with your feet. You need to make sure that you're an economic powerhouse. Republicans have a tendency, or conservatives have a tendency, not to necessarily do that, but you need to vote with your feet. Yes. And more importantly, if you want to sell the message, about what it would be like if, in fact, the left really won, is that it's like and this is the part that, again, I'll get on a hobby horse for a second. You know, when they wanted to put in charge, and the FCC was going to now be in charge of the internet. Now, if you go back through the history of the FCC, go back through the history of that abomination, let's see what wonderful things they did. Well, let's see. They screwed up FM radio. They screwed that up, even though there was a better technological thing. They did that. They slowed television. They slowed color television. They slowed the development of cellular technology. Geez, I guess they got a great winning track record. Oh, and by the way, they made Lyndon Baines Johnson a multimillionaire, because Lyndon Baines Johnson shook down the Chandler family to get properties, media properties in Texas, of course, which then he always could have a voice, but he shook them down because, of course, the FCC holds those licenses. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I just, as a hobby horse of mine, but there's an example of, and this is, I say this to people who are on the left, and I say, imagine, if you will, that now we don't have the benevolence that we have today, but real censorship starts cropping in. And now something you're interested in starts getting cut away. Because right now we have this weird distraction modality going on. But what happens when that goes away? Oh, you're going to go on Twitter. Maybe you won't be at Twitter anymore. So you're going to go on Facebook. Well, maybe that's not going to go. You know, we're going to now have people start looking at what you're putting on your SMS feed, you know, with your texting. Oh, what does that look like? Well, you know what that looks like? Looks like communist China shutting down Hong Kong. Right. Now, yeah. So anyway, that's when I get impassioned, and what and my irritant, and I'll take a breath because you need to talk, because I'm talking too much. Is that well, my frustration is that we don't have people on the conservative side, the right, when we have the opportunity, when somebody says something in a discussion forum, to just really nail them for an inaccuracy, you know, an inaccuracy about what is going on with the Palestinian situation, or an inaccuracy about what's going on with some of the statistical things that people are claiming, which are easily proven to be false, yet they get perpetrated out.
Actually, but I do think we do have some of those people. One of those people is Christopher Rufo, who has taken on critical race theory, and he's doing an incredible job.
Oh,
He's-
I didn't mean to imply that there is no one. What I'm saying is, but we need to build the technical resources. So we have our own technical resources. And as of right now, the internet is still open. We
yes,
still,
yes.
we still can do that. I mean, the best thing that happened to cryptocurrency just recently is the Chinese have stopped all the miners in China from mining cryptocurrency. And by the way, I think that they will rue the day they did that, because now they've pushed it back to the West. And now all the people who are going to mine it are going to go mine it and make money, because they couldn't afford to mine it before. Chinese government was actually subsidizing, trying to control it. But then they realized, ooh, we don't like, there's like too much squishy freedom. So yeah, we have to build our own resources is what I'm saying. That's why, what you and I are doing right now, we're building a resource. Now you're right. YouTube going to be a problem. All the major carriers are going to be a problem. And of course they have a monopoly in a sense that they have government protection, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to bring up was looking at what are the pillars, what are the critical, what are the pillars of society that are really important and necessary for a sustainable and a flourishing society. The reason I want to bring that up is because we'll be able to see the connection with the Marxist, Leninist, and anarchist movements that are trying to destroy them. I mean, one of them is the nation state. When the radicals talk about, the importance of, say, globalization and that we should have one central governing body for the world. What do they imagine? What are people imagining when they support that? Can you imagine what our lives would be like if the CCP was the governing body? Or, it's interesting because I'm going to just go off on a tangent right now. Right now, the Marxists and the jihadists are friends, right?
Right.
They both want control. The jihadists want to establish a caliphate that will rule the world. And the Marxist-Leninists, the communists, want to run the global governance because they want a communist world. It's very important for people to stop singing John Lennon's song of Imagine with whatever fantasy or LSD he was on at the time and deal with reality. The reality is that the nation state is very important. It is very important for, and the people who keep on saying diversity, but they don't want a diverse world, right?
No.
You can't have diversity without nation states. It's like, we go into shopping malls today and it's the same stores every place, right? Because and so the nation state is so important to protect religious freedoms, liberty, etc. Then there's also faith. And I believe that faith, that today, if we look at what's happening in the West, throughout the West, we're seeing a secularization of the West. And when you have a secular West, when you have a secular society, the notion then is that there's no creator. Man is the creator. And if man is the creator, then everything's a social construct, right? And if everything's a social construct, man can just change it. So what do we have today? We have a situation where there's really not a female and male. There's really not, it's like just because you're born in one body doesn't mean that that's your gender, right? We can change that. That's just one example. It's scary. There's Clayton Christensen, who was the innovator of, I mean, he was the one, he was the person um, who developed.
I know I know his work well. The innovator's dilemma.
Yeah, the disruption, right? And he did an incredible. There's a wonderful video on YouTube of his talking about the importance of faith, the importance of understanding that there is accountability, that there is a sense of morality, that there's consequence to behavior. And I think that we're losing that, and we're seeing that on the streets and the riots and the hatred and insane movements of also saying that we, you know, if anybody wants to have, like, you know, more children than like one, that's a terrible thing, right? It's going to destroy the world. I think that faith is probably the most important. It's probably the most important filter, whether one is a Christian of faith or a Jew of faith or a Hindu, whatever. But faith is important because it also gives us humility. And when man doesn't, I'm not talking about man, I just use man. When man has humility, then there are limitations, productive limitations. It's not that everything goes, right? And the third pillar that I think is really important is family. So if we go back to the Communist Manifesto, we see that, you know, those three things are critically important to the communists. You know, destruction of borders. It's very anti-religion. The only religion should be communism. And today we have, you know, wokeism, and that the nuclear family needs to be destroyed, because you can't control people if you don't have a nuclear family. Rod Dreher, who is a senior editor at the American Conservative, he writes brilliantly about the importance of the family as the unit of resistance. That it's very important for parents to teach their kids values, and also to teach them a realistic perception of the world, so that their kids can't be indoctrinated. So I wanted to throw that out there. There are more pillars, but for me, those are the three critical pillars.
I think one of the difficulties that we face today, and maybe, you know, let me take what you were talking about, is that when you have a society that has produced so much wealth and so much health and so much abundance, though people complain they don't have it, is that I think that they really, you know, you talk about humility, they don't understand what they have. One of the biggest things that moved me from being on the left to moving much farther to the right is that, and this is before the Berlin Wall fell, years before, is that in Poland was the cousin, and she and her husband lived in a small house, dirt floor, and once a month they had a chicken, and they had a ham for Christmas and ham for Easter. And basically that's it. And she was living under communism. And of course, you know, there you go. Now we have so much abundance in the West, that we have become in some ways intoxicated by it, and a belief that we don't have these things. So when I meet people who sit there and say they don't have things for whatever their want is that I think that's a breakdown of education, and not teaching people what they need to do to understand that they're taking care of their own life. The fact that we have what I call stimulus junkies, in
Mhm.
which they're so overstimulated. And of course, the family at one time was the mechanism that would kind of rein in those things. But
Yeah.
today, today you need, you need some, you know, you need the U.S. Army of logistics just to move somebody. You got the two kids, you got to bring all their stuff, you got to do this stuff. I mean, people went to the North Pole with less stuff, but
Yeah.
today that's like just a general thing. And I think once you indoctrinate children to that, and then they go to school, and in school they basically say, well, you have that, but you should feel bad about it. So nobody wants to give that up. So there's this dichotomy, but there's nothing in the family which says, listen, that's not correct. This is why this exists. This is why this is in place. And the fact that we have people who don't read, and that's really a problem. And when you don't read, or you don't do any research other than going on the web and looking up in something in Wikipedia, then you really have a problem.
Or if you only read the New York Times.
Well, and they don't have enough people to read the New York Times anymore. But yeah, if you only read the New York Times, but again, it's very hard for people to accept that when somebody puts out a radical idea. Again, you asked me, so there's an age differential between us. But I ended up going to a private school that was very much on the radical side. I mean, it was an alternative school. It was like Montessori on crack. I protested the Vietnam War. I got tear gassed, all that stuff. But when I looked at that stuff, I thought, because essentially I thought, anarchy was a pretty cool idea. And then I thought, well, what's the best way for an anarchist to have a free and open life and do whatever you want to do? Is I moved to Vegas, and I realized, no, Vegas is a series of fiefdoms, and there's no anarchy. There are people who will now. Those people will actually do real violence to you, not the kind of pretend stuff. But the reality of it is that we don't have a family, a cohesive family that actually supports and talks about, well, why are we here? What did we do? And I'll just give you one example. I had a client I was working with, and it was September 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked up to this guy, and I knew that his background is that he was Lithuanian. And I said, this must be a day of mourning for your family. And he looked at me and said, what are you talking about? I said, it's September 1st. He goes, what do you mean? I said, September 1st. And he goes, I know, September 1st. What do you mean? I said, family's Lithuanian, right? He goes, yes. I said, you know what happened in 1939? He goes, no, I have no idea. I said, 1939, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia all got absorbed in the Soviet Union without a bullet being fired. Hitler cut a deal. Stalin kept him and said, we're done. And you know what the West did? Nothing.
Right. Right.
And he looked at me and he said, wow. And I said, when you go home, guy was in his 30s. I said, when you go home, call your parents. If your grandparents are alive, call your grandparents, because somebody didn't give you the connection between what happened then to what happens now. And
Right.
I think that maybe that ties into the humility part of it. Are you in New York? Yes,
no, I'm in the great state of Tennessee.
Great state of Tennessee. Okay, all right, good. Sorry, I just.
No, I was actually, when I was born, we lived in New York.
Okay.
And then I was in Boston for 42 years, and I also come from the left, by the way, the radical left.
Right.
And I actually see that as being very important, because having been on the left, and there are many of us who have come from the left, David Horowitz and others, our analysis is sharpened by the real experiential understanding of leftist politics, of
correct
ideology. So I don't regret it. I actually appreciate the fact that I had that experience.
I don't regret it. I don't regret it at all. I think what happens is that many people don't make the journey because they have an axe to grind, and they just want to keep grinding that axe. And they never realize that it's never going to go away.
Right. There's one other thing that that is part of this, pie that we need to look at, and that is the importance of language. You reminded me of that when you were talking about people not understanding what they have, et cetera, et cetera. But language is so important, and the distortion of language, and this comes from also, I mean, the Soviets were incredibly talented at doing this, of changing the meaning of words.
Yes. Oh,
You
yes.
know, and what we used to refer to as equality, and equality really being from an American perspective, equality was about equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. But now the language has been so distorted that the word equity has come into the picture, and there are many people who still think that equity is a good thing. It's like equality. Well, no, equity is not a good thing. It's not like equality, because equity is about taking from one and giving to the other.
Correct.
Right? And that's
Yeah.
what we're dealing with now, the calls for equity. And that goes back to your comment about the vaccinations. Because what was going on there was that there was a lot of conversation out there saying that the vaccinations should first go to the Black community because they didn't have the same opportunities as the white community. There's no reason why it had to, that conversation wasn't necessary from a moral perspective. The vaccination should go to the people who are first, to the people who first of all wanted it, but were most vulnerable to COVID, right?
Well, and the libertarian in me said that there's, you know, you can do that, but again, we're back to the socialist dream of picking winners and losers.
Mhm.
And yes, I think you should figure out who is maybe the most vulnerable. But the other thing is that if you really want to spread the movement forward, is that you put it to a capitalist system. And if somebody wants to spend $1,000 and get a shot today, they spend $1,000 and they will pay for a lot of other shots. But
Yes.
in my mind, that the mistake of it is that having the government run it, and they did a terrible job. I mean, here I am in California. I mean, I'm on 2 lists. My wife is on 3 lists. Because of course you get to sign up for these lists. Both of us are vaccinated, and I will tell you, we're never going to hear from these people. We're never going to hear from these people, because it's just a big giant sucking sound of money, and they don't have their act together. We would have to have a whole another hour, Gloria. Maybe you can do a movie in a couple of years about it. Yeah, I'll give you just a little thumbnail. If you in fact want to get the most people vaccinated, which is what, and I believe the technology is good technology. I believe that it makes sense. I don't care where it came from. I just, I'm a gambler. I don't want, odds look better for getting the shot, not getting the shot. To make a decision that, and this is the socialist, these are the guys in charge, men and women in charge. I don't know, whatever QG, whatever you are, we're in charge, decided that they knew who was best to administer this. My doctor was not involved in this. My wife's cardiologist, who said if she got it, she could die, did not have access to this information. Why would you exclude the doctors who talk to the patients, who they know who the most vulnerable are?
Right.
They
Right.
know who they are because they see them all the time. Well, let's
Right.
exclude them because we have some utopian idea of how we're going to do this.
Right.
And we're going to figure that out. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, but I can go a lot longer, but we don't have that much time.
No,
I mean,
but I agree with you. And you gave a much better example of the implementation of equity than I did. So thank you for adding that.
no, well, and I'll give you one for equity or equality or whatever you want to call it. What I say to somebody is, listen, do you believe that the 80-20 principle is a principle? The Pareto principle is real. Studied by Pareto, an economist. He studied this. And what he found is there's this natural ratio, just like pi is a natural ratio, just like there are other things out there. So if you believe in the 80-20 principle, and we seem to in a lot of ways, but if you believe in the 80-20 principle, this idea of a level playing field is ridiculous. I want the best surgeon I can possibly find. I want that person who was in the top 20%, the top 20% of his or her class, and I want the best person. Oh, but no, not everybody can get them. Guess what? Go get then you, and you guys don't believe in God, so I don't know who you go bitch to, but I can tell you that you know what? I'm getting the best guy. I'm getting the best person I can find. It took me a year and a half to find the guy who did the LASIK eye surgery for me. Guy had done 20,000 patients, participated in all these FDA studies. I read this guy. It took me months to get scheduled with this guy. They offered to give me discounts. I charged a premium. Great result. In fact, the result was so good that my current ophthalmologist, when she goes and looks at my eyes the very first time under the microscope, she says, who did your laser eye surgery? I couldn't remember his name. I start describing him. She goes, oh, I know who it is. Oh, he did just amazing work. You have virtually no scar tissue, all that. Yes. And you say, and if you're out there saying, well, yeah, but John, not everybody gets that opportunity. Get off your ass and figure out what that opportunity is. Sorry, I got a little. So back to your movies. What are we going to be showing at Freedom Fest as we wrap up? Because obviously, Gloria, I find you fascinating, and we're gonna definitely talk more at Freedom Fest.
Okay.
But what are you showing at Freedom Fest? Let's get some butts in the seat.
Okay, so the fight of our lives, defeating the ideological war against the West, was shown at Freedom Fest in 2019, and it won the award for the best libertarian values.
Good for you.
Yeah. So part of my talk that I'm presenting on that's related very much to to these threats that are only going to get stronger as Jews and Christians, as Judeo-Christian values continue to get demonized. Part of that talk, I'm going to be showing one chapter of the film, which is really important because it's a chapter called People of the Book. It's about Judeo-Christian values and the importance for Jews and Christians to understand what we have in common and to work together to fight what's happening. But my new film that I'm in production with now will not be ready until it'll probably be released in October of 2022. So it would be probably 2023 at Freedom Fest that I'd be showing it.
Well, we're not going to sit quite that long, but you can see Gloria Greenfield at Freedom Fest this year. She's going to be speaking, and I do appreciate her coming on and spending some time. And again, I like to go a lot of different places, and she's, obviously very smart, thought a lot about these types of topics. And let's talk a little bit about why somebody should go to Freedom Fest, because if you're out there and you have not purchased a ticket, July 21st to the 24th, still time. And after Gloria tells us why you should go, I'm going to give you all directions on how to get there, so you have no excuse. So Gloria, take it. Why should somebody go to Freedom Fest?
Freedom Fest is such a reinvigorating experience. It's wonderful because you have a range of thought there, but it's really well thought out thought. I mean, it's people are smart, and the speakers are smart, and part of the culture of Freedom Fest is to have fun while we learn and we discuss and we argue. And it's on my calendar, I have to tell you, it's one of the must-go conferences for the year. I don't know anybody who's ever gone to Freedom Fest that didn't have a fabulous time, but it's really important to be able to continue to hone our analysis, to broaden our perspectives or our understanding, and that's what you can do at Freedom Fest. It's a must go, and this year it's at Rapid City, South Dakota, so you get to visit Mount Rushmore. There's just lots of fun and great people and good thinking.
Well, and with that, I'm going to tell everybody how to get to there if you live in the United States. So first thing you do is you locate Interstate 90. Now, if you cannot locate Interstate 90, go find your fourth grade teacher and get a refund. And when you find that, determine, are you east or west of Rapid City, South Dakota? And if you are east of Rapid City, South Dakota, head west until you get to the wide spot in the road in South Dakota, which will be Rapid City, South Dakota, 78,000 people there. And you can then find it. By the way, I don't leave anybody hanging. If you're west of Rapid City, you then head east until you find Rapid City, South Dakota. Now, you don't even need Google. You don't even need to go look it up in a map. That's how you get there. Now, some of you may say, John, we're going to fly. We're going to do that. However you want to get there, but you have no excuse. You have no excuse to get yourself there because it's going to be a lot of fun. I just want to thank Gloria Greenfield for spending some time today and having a rather invigorating conversation. And I know that this is one of many that will be going on. And if you go to Freedom Fest, here's the best part. You're going to meet all these different speakers. You're going to meet all these different various personalities, libertarians, conservatives, gold bugs, crypto people, you name it, you're going to meet them. And the best part is that every single one of them is just waiting to talk to somebody else, and you're going to have a great time. And it's a very good, safe environment, a wonderful film festival. And hopefully each and every one of you are going to be there. So I just want to thank Gloria Greenfield for coming on. And any last words, Gloria, before we wrap up?
I hope we get to talk in person because I really enjoyed this conversation. You're very smart, you're very articulate, and you're a good guy. And I don't take that for granted.
Wow, I'll tell you that. And I thank you very much. Appreciate Gloria. And with that, I just want to say I'm John Paul Mendoza for It's a Paul World, and we'll see you in Rapid City, South Dakota.